Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to RH News. Tonight, my panel and I will be discussing the 1994 film, Forrest Gump, and more importantly, how it portrays disabilities. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Marissa.
Hi.
We're here tonight to discuss Forrest Gump film, 1994 film of Forrest Gump, and how it portrays disabilities. And would you like to talk about the movie?
Yes.
Give us a small little story about the movie.
Yes, I can start with the introduction. So the film begins with a feather falling to the feet of Forrest Gump, who is sitting on a bus stop in Savannah, Georgia. Forrest picks up the feather and he puts it in the book Curious George, and then he tells a story of his life to the woman seated next to him. The listeners at the bus stop change frequently throughout the narration, and they're all showing disbelief. So then it shows a flashback to his childhood on his first day of school, and he meets a girl named Jenny, whose life is followed from time to time throughout the film. Forrest is bullied throughout childhood because he needs leg braces, and after breaking off those braces, he finds out he has the ability to run at lightning speed, and this gets him a scholarship to play college football. After his college graduation, he then enlists in the Army, and he is actually sent to Vietnam, where he makes his friends with a black man named Bubba, who convinces Forrest to go into the shrimping business with him when the war is over. Later, while on patrol, Forrest's platoon is attacked, and through this, Forrest rescues many men, but he does not rescue Bubba. Forrest, from this, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroism. While Forrest is in recovery for a bullet wound, he discovers his natural ability to play ping pong and eventually gains popularity and becomes celebrity status, later playing ping pong competitively for the Chinese teams, against the Chinese teams. And then at an anti-war rally in Washington, D.C., he reunites with Jenny, who he finds is living a hippie lifestyle. Returning home, Forrest endorses a company that makes ping pong paddles, and this earns himself $25,000, which he uses to buy a shrimping boat, fulfilling his promise to Bubba. His commanding officer in Vietnam, Lieutenant Dan, joins him. Though initially Forrest has little success after finding his boat was the only one to survive the Hurricane Carmen, he begins to pull in huge amounts of shrimp and uses it to buy an entire fleet of shrimp boats.
I found that amazing. I watched the film myself, and I was astonished with all the shrimp that came in all at one time.
Yeah.
Especially after hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
And his boat was the only boat that survived the storm at that time.
Yeah, how ironic.
Yeah, I know. And he kept his promise.
He did.
Yeah, he didn't decide to just take the money and go someplace else or anything. His intention was to keep a promise.
Mm-hmm.
I found that very astonishing.
Yep, dedicated to his friend.
Yeah, dedicated to his friend and all his friends, and to Jenny and to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
His family included.
And his mother.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so once they gain enough money and earn money through that shrimping business, Lieutenant Dan invests his money in Apple Computer, and Forrest is financially secure for the rest of his life. And he was able to return home to spend the rest of his mother's life with her. And one day, Jenny also returns to visit Forrest, and he's asked her to marry him, and she declines.
Oh.
She leaves early the next morning, and on a whim, Forrest decides to go for a run. He decided to continue running across several countries over 3.5 years, and that gained a lot of publicity, and he became famous through that. In the present day, Forrest reveals that he is waiting at the bus stop because he received a letter from Jenny. She has been seeing him through the television during his run, and asks him to visit her. Once he is reunited with Jenny, Forrest discovers that he has a young son.
Were you surprised by that?
I was shocked.
I was so surprised by that.
Yeah, it's pretty pretty miraculous that she's able to keep that from him.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because he was on a run.
Yeah.
And she just let him, do his, what he wanted to do. And he
Right.
dealt with the rejection through running. That's how he dealt with it.
He just kept going
The same thing he did when he ran from the boys with the braces.
Right.
He didn't know what else to do, so he just ran.
Yeah.
Right.
And he put together because Jenny told him to run from the boys.
Mhm.
So he remembered that, I think.
Yeah.
That's what that was my interpretation. And he just kept running. And then for 3 years, he just kept running, and that's how he dealt with the stress.
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuing theme throughout the film.
Yeah.
Just his ability to continue running through life and persevering through all that came his way.
Nothing
Yes.
got in his way. Yeah.
Yeah. So Forrest found out he was a father, and Jenny tells Forrest that she's suffering from a virus. Together, the three move back to Greenbow, Alabama, where they're originally from. And Jenny and Forrest eventually get married. Lieutenant Dan attends the wedding, and who now has prosthetic legs and is also engaged. Jenny soon dies after that wedding. The film ends with the father and son waiting at the bus stop on little Forrest's first day of school. Opening the book his son is taking to school, the white feather from the beginning of the movie is seen falling out within the pages. As the bus pulls away, the white feather is caught on a breeze and drifts skyward.
So what do you think that represents? What did you think that feather represented? Because I remember in the film, Forrest Gump put the feather in his favorite book, Forrest Gump book, or the
Curious George.
Curious George. And then he closed it. And he gave the book to his son, right? Curious
Yeah.
George book. And
Right.
so then his son opened the book and the feather flew out and flew away. What do you think that represents? What does that symbolize to you?
I guess to me that symbolizes just everything in his life coming all back full circle together, him being able to pass on his experiences and his lessons to his son.
Yeah, I think just that book was kind of his connection to just childhood in general, and how a lot of the things that he experienced in childhood kept with him through that life, and he was able to, you said, he passed that on to his son later on.
And I think the feather represents, to me, symbolizes the fact that it's destiny, so it flew away.
Yeah.
I know I'm kind of deep, but that's what I felt it meant.
Yes. So I guess overall, Forrest Gump is a man with good intentions. However, they describe him as having a low IQ and an intellectual disability. But from the main takeaway, I think that we got was just through all his trials and tribulations, he doesn't let anything interfere with his happiness and his determination.
I'd have to agree with you on that one. I found that the most important part of the whole film, and that he just didn't allow anything to bring him down, and that he always rose above everything naturally,
Right.
without effort.
Right.
That to me was, inspirational.
Yeah, he had a true natural perseverance and a willingness.
Yes, he did. He had a will that he was gifted with, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, ladies, for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Good evening again, and thank you for returning back to us. And now I have my whole panel with me here. We have now Emma, Shannon, Erdina, and of course you remember Marissa, and myself, Terry. So now we would like to discuss the portrayal of disability. Erdina, would you please go ahead?
Yep, sure. So hi. So now we would like to discuss about the portrayal of disability in the movie Forrest Gump. So there are a few points in the film that I would like to point out about the disability. So firstly, it's about how Gump wear braces when he was small. So actually, he wore the braces to support his curved spine. Do you think the braces itself shows that he is a disabled person or not?
I think without being educated from maybe RHS 100 or any other of the RHS classes here that students have at college, you might see him and think, oh, he's disabled and he won't be ever able to run.
Hey, dummy! Are you retarded or just plain stupid? just run away, Forrest. Run, Forrest! Run away! Hurry! Get the bikes!
Hurry up, let's get it! Come on! Look out, Dummy, here we come! Get you!
Run, Forrest, run! Run, Forrest!
We're back here, you!
Run, Forrest,
Now, you wouldn't believe it if I told you.
Well, I had, when I was younger, we had a student who had a brace from the top of her neck down to her waist. And we always looked at her as someone that couldn't do what we could do. And as a child, that's what I remember, is that she didn't have many friends, and that she was always left out in all the, because we were, into sports at that time when you're younger. So yeah, she was separated from us.
I think it's important to recognize that even though they do have something that's different, they have just as much ability to do the things that everyone else can do, but just in a different capacity.
And in the movie, we see that he can do everything that other people can do. Like, obviously, he runs and runs for miles and miles, and he doesn't let his disability stop him.
Right, and I even think, he even was able to get a scholarship due to his ability to run, which was
Yeah.
something that some believe that he never could. And I think it was really powerful for him to be able to overcome that physical barrier and to be able to continue on to at a college level.
Yeah. Something he was bullied for as a child, he turned around and was able to turn into like a college career.
And did you ever notice he never really took it seriously? I mean, he never internalized the fact that he had these braces on him. He never thought himself different than the rest of the people. And I think that had a lot to do with his mother telling him, don't allow anyone to think that you're different than everyone else. And so I think that really stuck into his mind during these stages.
Yeah, his mom was his advocate.
Yeah, at that particular point she was, yes.
Okay, so next, he also known for his intellectual disability, as he has low IQ. He's called stupid and he takes everything literally. For example, in the army, when he was instructed to assemble the weapons as fast as he can, he did that until he breaks the record in the army. And then when they were attacked in the Vietnam War, he saved people's life due to even though he has the low IQ and his intellectual ability, he was able to save people's life and gain the Medal of Honor, which even most people who are called normal or are able will not probably do that too. And then next one, when he ran for about 3 years around the country, he became an inspiration for everyone. There are many people who followed him because he ran across the country, even though that's not what normal people will do. But people make him as an inspiration, not because of his disability, but because of what he do, his actions itself.
Right, and I mean, most people didn't even realize he had a disability, which I think says a lot about even people with disabilities today. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes they can be invisible disabilities and, something mental, but I think it's important to just see people for who they are and not by something that either they're diagnosed as or, something they battle with or, find barriers from. I think it's important to just see them for who they are and not for a diagnosis, which goes back to that person-first language and really that's an important thing for us to advocate on behalf of, and just continue to use that in our daily lives, and helping to educate others on that same thing.
And his asset was being able to put together that gun with in less than 60 seconds it was?
Mm-hmm.
The whole gun. He had to load it, put it all together in 60 seconds. That pinpoint accuracy was his asset.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to do that with the ping pong too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that ability, he could say he might not have been able to do that if he hadn't had maybe the specific diagnosis that he had. It gave him a perk, and like it was one of his perks that he used it for a good thing. So I'm sure, like a lot of people with disabilities, they also want you to acknowledge it because it is a part of them and it's something that makes them unique, and it's just a difference, not necessarily, it's not a bad thing.
I don't think he ever thought he was disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Ever. He never internalized what the environment society thought he was.
Mm-hmm.
He just never did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Oh, you're
yeah.
go ahead.
So the next one is about Lieutenant Dan, how he gained the disability from war when he lost his legs. So during the early times that he became disabled, he was not able to accept that he became a disabled person. But in the end, eventually, he comes to terms with it, which is what Forrest Gump had hoped for him.
Yeah, I think it was really cool to see their connection through that, and just Forrest Gump's ability to continue to push him forward and show him that it's okay. We all have our uniqueness, and it's gonna be all right.
Yeah, and he cared more about Lieutenant Dan getting over his being there to help him get through his disability, like the diagnosis of his disability, and he didn't really care about the honor he got with it of saving his life.
Did you notice, Shannon, that he also really didn't kind of push his, advice on Lieutenant Dan? He kind of was stepped back, gave him some space to go through emotionally what he had to go through.
Yeah.
Yet he was there at the right time to give him the right thoughts, because he said, "You don't know how it feels to be disabled, to be without legs." And he said, "Yes, I do."
Yeah,
Meaning
because
his
he had the
braces.
braces.
Yeah, I thought that was very, right at the time.
Yes.
And he just waited for that right time. He didn't actually prepare for it. It just came out
Yes.
at the right time. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Forrest Gump was his advocate when Lieutenant Dan thought his life was over and he would have rather died in the war. And Forrest Gump kind of knew, no, this isn't going to ruin your life. In a subtle way, he was his advocate.
Yep.
Right.
At the right time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
not
think it
over.
was. Sorry.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
I think it was really special to then see them reunited at Forrest Gump's wedding, at Forrest and Jenny's wedding, and just, him having the prosthetic legs and him also having the ability, he then went and got engaged. I think that was really special to be like, hey, look where I am now, and,
It showed that he overcame.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think that was really
Came to
special.
peace.
Yeah. To see them both succeeding
Yes.
after the war.
Well, Dana, thank you very much for that. So now I'd like to introduce the models of disability, and I think Marissa would like to share her thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah. There were, as we just discussed, there were some physical barriers that Forrest Gump and as well as others experienced during the film. The braces that Gump had on his legs, I think people took pity on him, and people, doubted him and doubted his abilities due to those physical barriers. And as Erdina said, the braces were for his crooked spine, and it wasn't necessarily because his legs were messed up.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah,
Mm.
and it made it difficult for him to walk, and it made him, people were like, "Oh, you're never gonna run. That's almost impossible for you." But at the same time, I think telling him that people believed that they were protecting him from, being disappointed later in life. And he completely shut that out, as you said previously.
I wonder how someone could, not have that physical barrier by saying, let's protect him and let's, why don't we give that space for people to have a little bit of trouble?
Right.
So that they can feel that they can handle it, and we don't give them that chance to do that.
Right.
So yeah, that's a physical barrier.
I mean, I think you're the only one here that could understand this, but having your kid walk for the first time, you kind of just have to let it happen.
Oh yeah, and you
have
gotta
to
let them fall
right?
many times,
Right.
Unless there's like a huge thing in front of you. But yeah, you do have to let them fall.
Right, and I think Forrest Gump was just like anybody else.
Yeah.
You gotta let him figure it out on his own.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's our role to say what someone can and can't do.
Interesting you said that, because his mother just let him experience everything. She didn't stop him. No, you shouldn't do that. No, she just let him go, and she says, you've got to find your own life. You have to make your own life. So I thought that was, she never had a physical barrier with him.
No.
At all.
Something else that I noticed during the film was just the attitudinal barriers that came with that. And with his IQ, it was low, and as I just said, people were trying to save him from the disappointment, and possible failures in the future. People didn't want him to fail, so they just, kind of cut him out completely and didn't want him attending the school, because they didn't think he was capable. And unfortunately, through that, during this time, during the Vietnam War and during, the baby boomer part of, American history, favors were commonplace in our society.
Yes, that's right.
And it's unfortunate, but, Gump's mom, kind of felt that she needed to do something about it, and it's unfortunate that it had to come in the way that it did, having, she believed that sleeping with the principal is what was going to be the only way that Forrest Gump would have that opportunity to get the education that everyone else would have.
Well, she's a mother.
Yeah.
Well, mothers won't do what they have to do. I'm not saying I would do that, but I'm saying mothers will do whatever is needed to do, and I think that's what they wanted to represent in the film at the time.
Yes.
The favors.
Right. The favors and just, it's the education that he deserved in the first place.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree.
And then going on to the social model of, disability, people would often stare at Forrest while he was walking down the street and having trouble. And he ends up running on the football team, of all things. And he found a use for that, and he found a talent through all of that. And in some perspectives, he was seen as an inspiration because of it, because he was able to overcome that disability and utilize other skills that he had, such as the running, such as playing ping pong, such as, building guns in the military, like we've talked about previously. And this, this was surprising to the public, but in reality, it's no different than them. Anyone can do that, and it's kind of disturbing. I think personally, it's disturbing that people get so shocked when these people are able to persevere barriers and do things that everyone else can do. Do you guys?
I totally agree with you, and also I the point that you mentioned about his brace and he got stuck in the gutter, and then no one knew what to do.
Yeah.
And I think, we have to go beyond that and not be afraid to ask, is there something I can do for you? Is there any help that you need? If the person says no, that's fine, but you're connected, you're there. Not just stand back and say, oh, I wonder if he needs help, or what should I do? Ask.
Yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to ask.
Not at all.
If they need help.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the first step, is to be able to connect to that person and not be afraid to ask.
Right. I think that goes for a lot of things. Like in our society, a lot of subjects are hush hush.
Yeah.
Such as religion, such as other things. But I think it's important. I think it's important for us to be able to open our eyes and be educated about different religions, about different viewpoints, about different things that people go through, because we can see them as a person and they're just like us, they just have a different mindset, and that's okay. You know, but along with the whole, you know, asking and being willing to ask, you have to accept the answer, right?
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
If
Yes.
they don't need help, if
Right,
they don't
exactly.
want help, don't give them the help.
Yeah, you can just be there, but at a distance.
Right, like if someone on crutches wants to open the door by themselves, let them.
Yeah, and then ask, do you want me to open the door for you? Not just automatically open the door.
Right.
Yeah.
Because people do want that independence. They want that dignity.
But then again, if people are helping, don't you think that's coming from sympathy more than anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I feel too. I think it comes from a place of sympathy. Oh, I feel sorry for that person. Let me
Not
open the
thinking
door.
they're like able to do it themselves.
Right, or even ask.
Right.
That's empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if they need any help.
Yeah.
That's respecting the person.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I
Yeah.
feel.
And I think it's just a lack of education.
Yeah.
I feel like it is, because even from like when you're younger in public schools, like I feel like the kids that had a disability, they were always like kind of like pushed off with like a helper. Like they were always like just in their own like section. They were never like with everyone else like interacting, and I don't know why they kind of like push them like away from all the other kids, because like that's just like making them like their own group, like
More isolated.
more isolated. Yes, thank you, find the word for that. So like I feel like if they maybe like helped us at a younger age like understand that like they're not different than us, because that's kind of the way that like I feel like kids would portray it. If they're in different classes and different things like that, like it just makes like as a young like kid, you just be like, oh, that person's different than me, when they're really not. So
Yeah, and like if you've ever worked with kids or been around kids, they, I think, are more like taught to see differences and judge, because little kids, like, they just want to play with whoever's next to them. I don't see them saying like, well, you know, in kindergarten, you're on, like, you have crutches or a wheelchair. I think they just like, you want to play, you know.
Yeah.
They more so might be taught, don't acknowledge that, or don't.
Yeah.
I feel like even like your parents sometimes are like, oh, like don't look, like don't like do that. If like you'd see like a person like using a wheelchair, like using a cane or something, like you don't want to like your parents just kind of like tell you not to look, to like maybe make the person like feel different or whatever. But if you don't have that exposure to it, and you're just again thinking that they're different kinds of people, then it's never like you're never gonna fully understand it. Like,
And I think the parents are hiding behind the fact that they're afraid and that they don't want to be exposed to that. They don't want, you know, to be they want their children to be exposed, but they hide it by saying it's disrespectful to stare. I think that's just an excuse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it was also like a different time period that our parents like experienced, and even like grandparents, like just like how like the stages of disability have like changed over the years.
Yeah.
Like
With the different laws.
the different laws, exactly, like ADA like in 1993 or something, or maybe like it's just like things are like more like recent now, like it's becoming more like understood and like part like more part of like our culture and like social norms.
Right. Yeah. I think the last thing I have as far as models is the personal tragedy model. And I think Lieutenant Dan specifically exemplifies this throughout the movie, and just internalizing that idea of being broken.
Now, you listen to me. We all have a destiny. Nothing just happens. It's all part of a plan. I should have died out there with my men, but now I'm nothing but a cripple, a legless freak. Look at me. You see that? Do you know what it's like not to be able to use your legs?
Well, yes, sir, I do.
Did you hear what I said? You cheated me. I had a destiny. I was supposed to die in the field with honor. That was my destiny, and you cheated me out of it. Do you understand what I'm saying, Gump? This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to me. I had a destiny. I was Lieutenant Dan Taylor.
You still Lieutenant Dan.
And being not good enough, and poor me. But in reality, he is just as capable to overcome that acquired disability as anyone else is, because as we know, disability can happen at any time to anyone.
Yes.
It does not discriminate. It does not turn an eye to anyone. It's something that might catch you at the worst possible time, but it's something that we all have to have the will to overcome.
Yeah.
And what's awesome is Gump really helps him through this time, as we originally, talked about earlier, and he just ensures him that he knows what it's like not to have the ability to use your legs. And it's pretty cool to see that through the film.
Yeah. Thank you, Marissa.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So now I'd like to discuss the importance of advocacy. And I wanted to go back a little bit in history on two specific people that helped advocate for special needs people. One was the special education programs in the United States. There was one man named, he was the one that was a psychologist for the special child called Victor, the wild boy of Averun. And he earned an international reputation for helping this one particular child learn to speak. So he was one example of, an advocate for a particular boy. And then we have Helen Keller, the person that helped her learn to speak and talk and hear, not hear, but actually sign language. So these are two examples that were very inspirational in the history of advocacy. And now, as you can see, we are also having special education programs in the United States since 1975 that were mandatory. And we passed a law for the Handicapped Children's Act, and sometimes referred to the acronyms of EHA. And then there was a public law that was passed by, I think it was President Kennedy. I think he was the first person to pass that. And that was the Act 94-142. It was passed through the United States Congress in 1975 in response to discriminatory treatment by public educational agencies against students with disabilities. And then there is a magazine online, and it's a weekly journal that discusses the IEP scores and how they're updating the way they're teaching children with special needs, and how they are giving them more experiential experiences with skills, and it's phenomenal. And then they're graded according to this IEP score. Now, Forrest Gump's mother did not have the access to these provisions made by the United States Congress for the Education for All Handicapped Children Act and by the public law as well. In the response to the discriminatory treatment by public educational agencies against students with disabilities. In the movie, Gump is treated unfairly by his peers, by verbal and physical abuse. And then Jenny became Gump's first friend, his advocate, throughout his whole life, and on the bus to school when the boys teased him because of his legs. And she was the one that started him to say, "Run, run." She really believed in him, and she protected him. They remained friends throughout the whole of his life. And then Baba, during his mother's funeral, Jenny was an exceptional influence to instrumental towards the end in becoming the father of her child. So I feel that these people were all advocates for Forrest Gump in his life, and I think he was open for these people to come into his life because he didn't have this internal dialogue that said, "I am broken, I need to be fixed." So I think from there, he was always present. He never really internalized this disabilities that was portrayed by the society and the environment. And so I think that really just gave him, that freedom to have these people come into his life.
Yep. Society kind of created the barriers, but he and the idea of disability, but he didn't see that.
Yeah, don't you think we still need work in that area, though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, even in, as Emma said about, just the education system that we've all been a part of, and going through the public school system in America in the 2000s. I mean, they are still not as integrated into, the regular classrooms as I think they need to be. I think they need to be seen and they need to be understood and they need to be accepted. And they shouldn't be just distant students, that, are different and aren't as good as us, or, I don't believe that. And I think we do need to continue to educate our students at a young age because they do understand. They're not dumb.
No.
And
they have a different way of learning. And when I was in school back in the 60s, when I was in elementary school, we had one or two children that had special needs intellectually. And they had to take the same tests that we had to take. And they had to finish at the same time that we had to finish. And I remember looking in front of me. They were always sat in the front. And they never were able to finish their tests. But the teacher would take the test.
right.
And then that would be it. They failed. And then two of them never came back to school because they failed.
Yeah, I think that's a fine line, between treating them as everybody else and giving them the respect and the understanding that they deserve as far as how their brain works differently.
Yeah, no, I think it was disrespectful. In fact, they did not make provisions for these two students at all. They just said, here, well, you're in the school, this is the test you have to take, and good luck. That's it.
That's why you need to find the happy medium between the two things. It can't be you want to it has to be equal. It has to be fair for them without them seeing it as being different than other people or other people seeing them as different,
Right. And jump ahead, I have a son who's autistic and he's 21, and he has a tutor that sits with him and helps him along with his
during class.
Yeah, during class.
Yeah, there used to be students in my class
so
that.
We are moving ahead, so that's a good sign. It's really a good sign. And he has an IEP examination that's different than the regular exam. So I find that's very
Making
nice.
progress.
Yeah.
And I think, in the movie, Lieutenant Dan is that advocate for Gump through the military. And, when his mom can't always be around, and because, Gump doesn't really see anything wrong with it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see other people catching on to it and kind of sticking up for him, such as, Gump, Lieutenant Dan defends Gump when he's called stupid, and then, when women refer to Lieutenant Dan as a freak after, he lost his legs, they kind of played off of each other, which was really neat to see, and it just comes down to a lack of education, and that lack of education has become a burden and has become an issue in the society because he's not a freak, he lost his legs. But that doesn't make him any less than us. It doesn't make him inferior. It makes him, I think he has been able to work towards, he was able to get his prosthetic legs and, he's just like everybody else. And then, the drill sergeant seeing Forrest Gump as extremely intelligent because of his abilities during the military, and it's really cool that it's not like he went into the military with a sticker that says, "Hi, I'm disabled." I think it's neat for people to just be seen for who they are.
It's the Vietnam War was in 1950 or 1960. Do you remember when? 1960s, right? And then the act was passed in 1985, 1985. I think it is.
It's a long time.
That's a long time. That took a while.
Gap of continuing, bullying and misunderstanding.
yeah, that took a long time, so I think we've got some work ahead of us.
Absolutely.
And like if like the ADA, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, was only passed in like the 1990s, like that's so like
I know.
I mean, I guess like that's like 20, like almost like 30 years ago, but it still sounds like so like close, like
Yeah.
not
It
that
was
long
still
ago.
a short period of time.
Yeah.
And then again, also, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think they even stopped funds during Roosevelt's time, and he was handicapped.
Wow.
He was in a wheelchair. He had polio,
Yes.
right? So,
Interesting.
you know, he tried to push it through, and then all of a sudden the funds stopped. I think anyway, that's politics, but that's what happened. Yeah, we have to keep advocating and, you know, be the cultural brokers. And now I'd like to introduce Shannon, who's going to discuss with us the cultural broker.
As we mentioned earlier, Forrest needed braces for his back, for his spine, and as he was getting bullied, the kids multiple times had asked what was wrong with his legs, and he just kept saying, "Nothing is wrong, my legs are fine and dandy," and eventually got to a point where the bullying was so bad that Jenny just told him to run, and he just kept running, and the braces came off. So we see that Jenny is a big advocate in his life and pushed him to run, and that was one of the biggest themes in the movie. And we see that Gump finds that he's good at what he's good at, and he succeeds in them. That includes running, ping pong, assembling guns, in the military. And once he finds something he's good at, he just keeps doing it, even if like he doesn't intend to do it. People just find, like people see him doing something, and they just like bounce off of that and say, "Do you want to join this team?" And he just continues with it. And then Lieutenant Dan believes he's a cripple, but Forrest Gump is an advocate for him, and Lieutenant Dan eventually comes to terms with his disability and finds peace within himself.
What do you think about the idea that now that we have this information and we have this education, right?
Yes.
So now we're responsible to be, you know, a cultural broker for whoever's in front of us that comes our way. So it's like it's already destined that that person is there for you for a reason. And so now we are responsible to be that.
We have to speak
after
up.
this education, we have to do it.
Yeah, we have
So I
to
feel like
speak
all
up.
you need is that one like person or like just everyone
That's
to
it.
just be there and like push you, like tell you to like you can do it, like not unmotivate you.
We can't stay quiet anymore. We can't be afraid to speak up.
Tell us about your involvement with veterans. All of us remember Forrest Gump, the role you played, a significant role back in the, 94 when that film came out. But you've had an amazing involvement with veterans over these years. Explain how this evolved.
Well, it's several reasons, I think, starting with my family. On both my wife's side of the family and my side, I've got veterans. Her side of the family is Vietnam veterans, her two brothers. Her sister's husband served in Vietnam and was in for 22 years. And then my side of the family, World War II, Korea, World War I. That's a big connection there. And then my involvement with Vietnam veterans goes back to the 1980s. And we all remember how shameful they were treated when they came home from war. It was a very difficult period for us, and they paid a price. And so having them in my family, having several friends who served in Vietnam after we started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, and having been involved with the DAV, the Disabled American Veterans, since playing one in Forrest Gump back in the 90s, I just knew there was a role for me to play currently in supporting our active duty service members and trying to make sure that they knew that we were grateful for what they were doing. If they go off to war, they're going to come home and we're going to show our appreciation to them.
All of us remember, Lieutenant Dan Taylor, the role you played in Forrest Gump. And when you go into a hospital and meet with wounded warriors, to this day, they refer to the film.
Well, I realized very early on when I started visiting the hospitals. The first hospital I visited, military hospital, was Landstuhl over in Germany. And I realized as soon as I walked in and started visiting our troops overseas, they were all, most of them didn't even know what my real name was. They just recognized me from the movie, Lieutenant Dan. And it was an automatic icebreaker. They started talking to me about the movie, and I could, you know, they felt like I could relate to what they were going through because I played that part in the movie. And so very early on, I realized that that particular character was just going to be a part of my life in a way, because I'm very devoted to our military, very devoted to making sure that our veterans know we appreciate what they do. And if, you know, they want to talk about Lieutenant Dan, that's fine with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Shannon, for that. That was very important to reintroduce or discuss this. That's very important that we all take a responsibility towards being an advocate, a cultural broker for anyone, you know.
And we'll be right back. We're going to take a commercial.
Welcome back. Now we're going to conclude our discussion with Emma. And I'm going to ask her a question. Hi, Emma.
Hi.
So I want to know, how do you feel about Tom Hanks playing someone who is disabled? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that there's a positive way to look at that, and there's also a negative way to look at it. I think that Tom Hanks is like a good person to play that role, just because of like the kind of like person he is like, he's very like empathetic, just like a genuine good person. Mm-hmm. But also, I do think it's unfair that they wouldn't pick a person, an individual like with a disability to play that role.
So what do you think is the reason why they won't do that or take the time to do that?
I think it all has to do with like the education of like the directors, and just like that, like they kind of have like this belief that it's easier to teach an actor how to play a person with a disability than it is to teach a person with a disability how to act, mm-hmm. how to, you know what I mean? Because if they've never acted before, how can they just like pick that up and just do everything that the director expects them to do?
So what you're saying is that the director doesn't have faith that the person with the disability would be able to learn how to act.
I mean, I don't know.
So what do you think of that idea? I mean, do you think that's basically what that means?
Yeah, I mean, I think producers don't have the patience or don't have the willingness or, you know, the education to mold someone.
Mm-hmm. But they teach dogs, and it takes forever to teach a dog, right? I mean, they'll replay with a dog, and they'll keep going with a dog. And
they have like special trainers for dogs, like off to the side.
So why don't they have a special trainer for someone with disability?
I think it's just never been something that was like brought up, like never anything that was like put on the table. Like I think it's just like directors are all about like convenience for them, and like their whole like,
they just have a certain vision.
They have, yeah, exactly. They have a certain vision. Like they just want like the actors and the actresses that can do that for them, and they're confident in that. Mm-hmm. And they also have like a time frame, like you know what I mean, and like a budget, like things like that are like hard, and like it's unfair, but it's like just the way that like the movie industry is right now. And I feel like with cultural breakers and like all the knowledge in this class, we can be able to break that eventually, and I hope we see that in the future. But yeah, what do you guys like think about that? Like,
I now, if you look at films now, I watched this one old film on Netflix. I don't want to go into what the name of the film is. It's a nurse, it's Housewives, or it's called Midwife. I don't know if you've ever seen it. In there is a person with intellectual disability, and he really is intellectually disabled, and he portrays it, and they embraced him into it as a child, as one of their children. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to see that. It's refreshing. Actually, you believe it more than someone is acting like.
So you think it's more impactful?
Oh, big time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that the purpose of this film was to bring light to disabilities?
That's a good point.
I feel like in a way, I think it kind of was, just because like he like was just pushing through his disability. He wasn't looking at his disability as like a barrier. I think like that's what's important, and like even like what he was doing for like others, like I think he was just trying to break that, so it is looking at disabilities in a good way. But like, if you go behind the scenes, thinking about like Tom Hanks like playing a role of a person with a disability, like then that's where I think like it's like more like it's negative, like it's not a good representation of a person with disabilities.
Right. I mean, I don't personally have an intellectual disability, but I just feel like it could be seen as insulting to someone who has that disability and who, you know, it might not look like that for them. And it might not be a 100% accurate portrayal, and they might, you know, not appreciate that, and you know, they might even think that they could do it better. And if someone just took the time to discuss that with someone, or even behind the scenes, you know, having a conversation about what it's like to have a disability, and having the producer have that appreciation for that disability, such as, you know, producers make things based on true stories all the time, and if they're lucky, they are able to sit down with the person whose story it actually is and have an appreciation and try to capture that life or that experience in the movie. And I just think that it needs to be better appreciated and better educated. Producers need to be better educated about how to best do that in films.
Yeah, because if you're a producer and you're choosing like characters and like roles in the movie that have of a person that has a disability, like why can't you just give the opportunity to someone with a disability to do that? And also like I like found this interesting. So I was wrong earlier. The ADA like became a law in 1990, but the film was produced in 1994. So like the whole purpose of like the ADA was to give like more opportunities to people with disabilities to like, you know, get involved with jobs, like schools, like transportation, just like public and private places, like be more like interactive within that. So if this movie like was produced after that law was passed, don't you think like it would be like a little different? Like when you expect like more fair like treat, like
It takes time. It took 20 years or 30 years.
And I guess we're still not even there.
I think the movie, you asked a very interesting question. What do you think the movie was trying to portray at the time? And I think it was trying to expose at least people to accept more. That's what I feel this movie really represented, was to, you know, not be afraid that they are just as capable as we are. And that we're all in this together, and so just to keep that exposure, you know.
But I feel like it did kind of go along good for like the time like frame then, with the whole like act passing and then the film. It's just crazy that now we're like still like it's almost 30 years after that was passed and all these other laws before then, and we're still not at that point. Like, you know, thinking about it. Like with all that like in front of us right now and comparing it to the movie, it's kind of like shocking.
Yeah, I know like the deaf community is a good example of something going on right now where they're saying like, why can't deaf individuals play deaf roles when they see people signing and then you find out they can really hear, they're just pretending that they can't, and they don't take that well. So I know that there are a few shows on Netflix.
There's like a show now where she's an investigator and she's deaf and she can speak a little bit and she uses sign language. And her partner learned sign language so they could communicate together. So they do both.
That's cool.
And it's very organic. You can actually, you know, it has a bigger impact.
And it's a good point that you say her co-worker learned
he did
sign language, because he could have said, well, why don't you just get a hearing aid or read my lips? He is helping. He's not making her quote unquote like disabled. He's educating himself. You know?
He's his culture broker.
He is, I
mean, that's our role in the society.
Well, thank you, ladies. I appreciate that. Yes, you're welcome. And we'll say good night, and thank you for tuning in to RHS News. Good night.